Well, I'm Chris Butler. I'm a senior product strategist at Philosophy New York City, which is a small product and design consultancy. And so we focus a lot on very early stage groups. So trying to take a founder and their idea to fruition to something that they can either prove or disprove or validate or invalidate that it's something worthwhile. Or we work with very large companies that are trying to innovate or trying to breathe new life into the business that they have. I think how I got here is actually a pretty long and windy road. I originally ended up, originally I started as a designer as an apprentice to my dad. And so he was a graphic designer, art director. And his vision for my future was to become something like an industrial designer for automotive, go to Art Center, College of Design. And basically, this was around the time that his industry was really digitizing. And so he moved from doing a lot of like linotype, actual typeset stuff that he would pick up and then cut up and put on tissue paper to do layouts, to things like Quark Express and Adobe Illustrator. And so because I did a lot around computers, I ended up teaching like a computer programming course in my high school. Like I was just really into computers at the time, a lot around programming and some maybe not above board computer and phone stuff at the time as well. Yeah, so I ended up doing a lot of the mechanical work for my dad's design business. And so that would usually mean taking his art direction to create things like an ad. And so he did a lot of print stuff. And I started helping him and his clients pull together really early stage web pages. And so, this was back in the day where you still did a lot of like tables with invisible pixel images to cut, to basically lay things out, a lot of image maps for linking, that type of stuff. And when I ended up going to actually apply to Art Center College of Design, which is down in Pasadena, really great art school on the West Coast, I brought in a zip disk of all of my commercial art, and they had to like ask someone to find someone to bring a zip disk out. And they asked where all of my sketches and my sculptures were. And I just made it very clear that I was not a fine artist, I was a commercial artist. And so maybe at that point, that's when I realized that going into design was not necessarily my calling at that point. And so I ended up going to Boston University for their College of Engineering and did a computer systems engineering degree, which is really a halfway between computer science and computer engineering. So we would learn things like VLSI design, like how do you lay out chips, how do you actually build logical gates, all that type of stuff. But we'd also do a lot around, say, 3D programming or cryptography and more of the algorithmic side of computer science. When I was graduating from Boston University, I was, I interviewed at a few different places, mostly as hardware engineering roles, like places like Motorola at the time, General Dynamics, stuff that was, maybe a little bit more focused on security, hardware, that type of thing. But I also interviewed at Microsoft. And that was when I was, for whatever reason, and I'm not exactly sure to this day why, but I was put in program manager interviewing circuit rather than an engineering circuit. And so, it was a very different way to think about things. And so, some of my senior year classes were about pulling together a lot of information to build out a full project. And a lot of that really interested me. So how do you try to decide what things you're building? How do you work on a project end to end? How do you plan for that whole project? I really was interested in. And so one of the questions that they asked during the interview that I think really sold me on the role as well was asking, what would, if I were to design a washer dryer combination for someone that was sight impaired, what types of questions would I ask and what types of things would I do to design for them? And the answer is not really important, but I mean, it's really, that building of empathy where you're trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes to really understand what is the task they're trying to get done? How can you aid them in doing it better or doing it in a way that's simpler or just in the end, maybe make them happier or better off in their life in some way. And so that's when I ended up going to Microsoft as a program manager in the Silicon Valley campus, which is just down the street from Google. And this was around the time in the Silicon Valley area where Microsoft was still considered the evil empire. And so while doing a lot of outreach, I definitely I enjoyed socializing within the kind of network of people, tech people within the Bay Area, it was still challenging because I was a Microsoft person. So I ended up being there for about 7.5 years, working on a lot of different projects, including Hotmail. One of the things that I tried to at least help Hotmail figure out or warned Hotmail about was Gmail. And that totally blew up the entire model of everybody like constantly ratcheting down space for your email. But I did a lot of very interesting things around backend tools and data warehousing for Hotmail. And so looking at how usage patterns changed after those types of things was really interesting to see. And it's very much like an inflection point for their business. I ended up working on a lot of other stuff, including like desktop search, gadget platform. I do have a Windows Vista ship it somehow, which I don't show off to everybody. And then ended up running a group as a lead program manager called Windows Live Gallery, which was really a proto app store. So you could find things like emoji and emoticon. We called them emoticons at the time, not emoji. But emoticons, you could find avatars for your MSN Messenger or Windows Live Messenger. But what was most interesting were these gadgets that were available for not only your desktop or your live, like kind of your front page that you'd go to on live.com, but also hardware ones and a bunch of other platforms. But this was, probably one of the things that I had always heard Bill Gates had said was that we would never host other people's software. And that was something that we ended up doing with Windows Live Gallery. So not that I blatantly disobeyed Bill Gates or anything like that, but building the case internally for Microsoft doing something that was potentially very uncomfortable for them, and building this type of app, app store essentially for these things that bridge the Windows Live, and Office brands. It also meant that I spent a lot of time on antitrust calls because of the cross-play between Windows Live, Windows, and Office. It was really an amazing experience. I mean, I think we ended up running, the program manager team ended up helping a team of about 50 total that included engineering, QA, operations, and customer support team for doing approvals. At that point, I ended up leaving Microsoft to join a startup as a content platform evangelist or a tech evangelist, working for a place called Dash Navigation, which was really the first GPS device that was connected via cellular modem. And so you could do a lot of live services through this hardware device. This was kind of a year or two before the iPhone really came out. And so I ended up not only helping understand the program management side of, well, in that case, I was more of a product manager stuff side. But how do you build the right type of platform so people can build interesting things on top of this device, but also going out there and really evangelizing the idea that connected services deserve to be in the car. And so it's a very interesting role. And that's probably that started me down the path towards business development. And so after that, ended up getting laid off for the first time ever from that company when they were running out of money, and worked as a official business development person for a company. When I ended up getting laid off from there because they were running out of money, I ended up starting my own business, and that was called Complete Seating, which was a restaurant reservation site service for kind of like a competitor of OpenTable. Most of the focus was in San Francisco, but we had paying customers, I think about 15 paying customers. And my role was really around the product side, strategy, but I also spent about a third of my time doing development. And had a really amazing technical co-founder, Hubert, who I still, talk to a lot. And, really probably one of the best experiences that I had. Unfortunately, that didn't work out either. There's probably we could probably do a whole thing just about kind of lessons learned from that. But it's still something that I'm probably the most proud of, but also was the most painful to end up shutting down. So when I was looking around, when I was kind of winding down Complete Seating, I ended up getting a role at Waze as a business development person. And so that first started focusing on getting local TV stations to use Waze on air during their morning broadcasts, which is a really great crossover. They are talking to people about traffic, and then people are getting into their car and then not thinking about the TV station anymore, and vice versa. We want to get people, once they're in the car after they've been thinking about traffic, we want them to start using Waze. And so that was a program that they had partnered with one group in LA. I ended up growing up to about 26 different stations nationwide, and then parlayed that into programs with various like city, state, and national level DOT programs. But anyways, it was a really great growth engine for Waze, right? Like when I started, I think we were at 7 million people worldwide. When I ended up leaving, it was about 50 million. I definitely wasn't all because of me, but I could definitely say that program helped. And so what was interesting about that role is this was, again, that hybrid role of doing product management as well as business development. And this, was a talk I did during the I believe 4th season of the Product Mentor, was focusing on kind of like how BD and product management really are kindred spirits. They focus on trying to understand why things need to happen. They need to deal with prioritization and resourcing. It's just that for product managers, it's usually for people around the people that work at that company, whereas business development has the ability to be able to create things between multiple companies. And there's definitely differences, but I think there's a lot of similarities too. And so anyways, ended up moving to Hong Kong, worked for an incubator in the Horizons group, which was a VC that invested in Waze and a bunch of other companies as director of product. And then ended up moving to New York, did some consulting with a couple different companies. I worked for KAYAK for a little while in kind of a, again, BD and product hybrid role. But most recently, I've really just, figured out that I've missed product. And I think it's much easier for a product person to do BD-like work than it is for BD people to do product-like work. Just because no one trusts BD people, it feels like, at least from the product side. So I think that's why this really great role ended up being found by Philosophy, and so that's really where I am today. I think the really amazing thing about the role I have as a senior product strategist here at Philosophy is that we do think so much about the tools that we use and the process that we use that, I think there's a lot of people that are in the agile or lean world that give lip service to this idea of retros and constant learning, but nothing really changes from, and so I've done at least 4 or 5 different postmortems within the group for projects that we've taken on. And just doing an inventory of the different tools or processes that we tried out, it's at least 5 new processes that we tried out every single engagement. And some of those worked out really well. Some of them were very helpful. Others didn't necessarily do what we had hoped that it would. And so maybe that's one of those things that I think is really key about being a great product manager, is really trying to understand all of the different tools that you have available to you, and what are the pros and cons of using those tools? When is it appropriate to use those tools? And so that's something that we really focus a lot in the product practice at Philosophy.